Vanessa opened the velvet box and froze. Inside, an empty slot where the emeralds once sat, and a receipt worth more than her car. A note lay folded beneath it. "Since you asked," her mother-in-law had written. Margaret had smiled through the insults, the theft, the betrayal. Now she'd taken back everything, with silence, receipts, and a rewritten legacy. "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." She smiled at my stones, then called them cheap. The dining room sparkled with soft candlelight, the silverware glinting under a chandelier that had seen better conversations. Laughter floated through the air, hollow, controlled, the kind that lived just above resentment. Margaret sat quietly at the end of the long mahogany table, her posture straight, the weight of decades resting on her spine, but her face unreadable. The emerald necklace sat on her collarbone like dew on spring leaves, elegant, subtle, old world. She hadn't worn it in years, not since Harold passed. Tonight, she wore it for herself. Vanessa, her daughter-in-law, leaned in toward a sleek brunette sitting beside her, one of her influencer friends, Margaret presumed. With a faux whisper, just loud enough to cut through the Chardonnay haze, she said, "It's cute, right? Looks like something from a costume bin, or like QVC from the 80s. The brunette giggled, eyes darting to Margaret. "Is it real?" "Oh God, no," Vanessa whispered, twirling her own platinum bracelet. "It's just sentimental junk. She thinks it's vintage, but honestly, it's probably worth less than dessert." Margaret's wineglass paused midair. For a second, she stared at her reflection in the red. Then she smiled. Not the brittle, polite kind, something deeper, almost serene. She said nothing. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. She let the insult rest there, between the roasted duck and the heirloom china. Daniel, her son, kept his eyes on his phone, completely disengaged. If he had heard it, and he had, he pretended not to. Later that evening, back in her room, Margaret stood in front of her mirror, slowly removing the necklace. She ran her fingers along the green stones, remembering the warmth in Harold's eyes the day he gave it to her. It had been their 30th wedding anniversary. They were never flashy people, but Harold had saved for months, even sold his rare record collection to buy the set. "Because you deserve to wear something that outshines even your loyalty," he'd said as he fastened the clasp behind her neck. She remembered how her hands had trembled, overwhelmed by the love. Not because of the value, but because he'd never made her feel invisible. Margaret reached under her bed, dragging out the cedar lockbox. Inside were layers of soft cloth, brittle envelopes, and memory-soaked paper. She removed a thin folder marked Valuables. The emerald set's original receipt was inside, dated, notarized, authenticated by the same boutique jeweler who used to send Harold handwritten thank-you notes. She read the valuation aloud, softly, like a bedtime story to herself. Then, with the same gentle care, she placed it back, tucked the box away, and stood. She didn't cry, but her silence wasn't weakness, it was preparation. The next morning, while steam rose from her tea, Margaret called her banker. "Hello, Ms. Ashton," the voice greeted. "What can I assist you with today?" "I'd like to review my estate," Margaret said, her voice composed but firm. Discreetly. "Of course. Any particular changes?" "Just realignment," she said, gazing out the window at the family garden, the one she'd planted herself when Daniel was a boy. "It's time to ensure that things go to the people who recognize value when they see it." She ended the call and sipped her tea, her fingers grazing the faint outline of her necklace resting in her jewelry box. The stones might be out of sight, but they were not out of play. Upstairs, Vanessa's laughter rang out through the hallway. Shallow, self-satisfied. Margaret tilted her head toward the sound, not with anger, but with precision. They say some things lose their shine over time, but truth only gleams brighter. Later that afternoon, Margaret slipped an envelope into her purse, labeled Power of Attorney, Request to Update. She closed her front door softly behind her and headed to the bank. The necklace wasn't the only thing authentic in her possession. some compliments cut deeper than insults. The brunch table was all beige laughter and bottomless mimosas, clinking glasses between mouthfuls of avocado toast and entitlement. Vanessa was in her element, chin slightly raised, every syllable wrapped in silk and superiority. Margaret sat 2 seats down, nursing her coffee, invisible in plain sight. "So anyway," Vanessa said, swirling orange juice with her gold straw, "I guess I'll inherit the costume collection someday." She smirked as she air-quoted the words. "I mean, it's all sweet, but we'll probably have to donate most of it. Sentiment doesn't equal value." The women around her chuckled politely, their eyes flicking toward Margaret, then away like birds avoiding a storm. Margaret lifted her eyes, meeting Vanessa's with quiet calm. "I'm sure you'll make the most of it," she said gently, folding her napkin. "Of course," Vanessa replied, smiling wide. "No one else in the family really gets jewelry the way I do." Margaret didn't answer. Her silence wasn't compliance, it was containment. She remembered another brunch, years ago, before the wedding. Vanessa had wept in their living room, clutching a rejection letter from a luxury condo association. Her credit was in shambles. Daniel had paced helplessly. Margaret had opened her checkbook. No one thanked her then, either. But they cashed the down payment like gratitude was optional. Daniel now existed somewhere between shadow and silence. His presence at home was muted, just enough to seem supportive of both women, yet committed to neither. Lately, even when they spoke, his tone felt borrowed, like he was quoting someone else's script. Margaret saw it but never named it. There was power in withholding names. That afternoon, Margaret returned home, quietly opened her safe, and removed a slim blue folder marked Joint Accounts. Each page, each signature, was a string she had tied herself into, back when family meant unity, not hierarchy. She took a slow breath, then picked up the phone. "Cynthia? It's Margaret Ashton. I'd like to make some changes to my accounts." Privately. At the financial office, she sat across from her advisor in a taupe-toned room with the scent of pine cleaner and paper ink. "Are you sure you want to separate all shared accounts?" Cynthia asked, adjusting her glasses. "I'm not erasing anyone," Margaret said. "Just reorganizing into clarity." Within the hour, she had withdrawn her name from their shared estate fund, dissolved her co-signer status on Daniel's secondary mortgage, and rerouted her assets into a private trust account. Everything was now under her name alone, with conditions. She named the trust after her mother, Edith's legacy, a woman who had raised 5 children on seamstress wages and never lost an ounce of dignity. That night, Margaret sat alone in her study, the hum of the grandfather clock steady in her ears. She wrote in her ledger with her favorite blue pen, the one Harold gave her in 1986 after she filed her first legal document on her own. "Today I made peace with memory," she wrote, and gave my silence a lock. The following morning, the sun filtered through soft curtains, warming the wood floors as Margaret stood over an open filing cabinet, sorting old estate records, some real, some planted. Vanessa's heels clicked sharply across the tile. "What are you doing?" she asked, trying too hard to sound casual. Margaret didn't turn. She held a yellowed envelope between her fingers, letting it hover just long enough to be seen. "Just sorting trash," she said, her voice as sweet as chamomile. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "Need help?" "Oh no, I know what's worth keeping." Margaret placed the envelope into a folder with deliberate calm. "Sometimes you don't realize what's valuable until it's gone." Vanessa tilted her head, lips pursed. "Sounds poetic." "It's arithmetic," Margaret said, and closed the drawer with a soft but final click. That night, under the soft glow of her desk lamp, Margaret printed new titles for 3 boxes in her safe: Legal, Valuables, and Legacy. The last drawer she opened revealed a dusty, unused USB drive labeled "Just in Case." She plugged it in, and what loaded on screen? A scan of her original will and the blinking cursor of its newest edit. Vanessa wore designer bags, but she didn't know value. The laughter rang through Margaret's phone in short, glittering bursts, carefully edited, tagged with filters and hashtags. "Modern elegance," the caption read, over a video of Vanessa twirling in a floor-length satin dress. a champagne flute held just so in her hand. Margaret watched it unfold from her quiet living room, her fingers resting on the mug of untouched tea. No invite had arrived, no mention of the charity-themed soiree at Vanessa and Daniel's new place, but there she was, on the screen, glowing in soft lighting, camera panning over curated guests and five-tiered centerpieces. Then the frame froze. Margaret blinked. On Vanessa's hand, flashing with every exaggerated gesture, was a ring. Oval emerald, gold band. Tiny imperfections in the setting, just like the one Harold had given Margaret on their 25th anniversary. She slowly rose from the sofa, crossed to her bedroom, and opened the top drawer of her vanity. The jewelry case sat exactly where she left it, velvet lid unassuming. She opened it, heart thudding a little too hard. One slot was empty. The emerald ring was gone. She stood still for a full minute, no gasp, no panic, just silence, as if the air had turned into glass and dared her to move too fast. Then, with steady hands, Margaret reached into the back of the drawer and pulled out a small cardboard box. Inside, wrapped in linen, were two tiny security cameras, not the kind that blinked red and scared away shadows. These were discreet, meant to watch, not warn. She installed one in the upper corner of her bedroom, facing the vanity. The second she placed near the study, angled toward her filing cabinet. Both synced silently to her tablet, which she tucked beneath her nightstand drawer. The next day, she made a phone call. "Hello, this is Margaret Ashton. I'd like to schedule an appointment." "Yes, with Mr. Renaud, please. It's personal." When she walked into Renaud's jewelry the following week, the air inside still smelled of wood polish and floral oil, the same scent that clung to Harold's coat after every visit there. The bell over the door jingled as it always had. Mr. Renaud, now grayer but still sharp-eyed, greeted her with a warmth untouched by time. "Mrs. Ashton, it's been too long." Margaret placed a printout from Vanessa's social media on the counter. It was a paused still from the video. "Look at the ring on her finger," she said. Renaud adjusted his glasses, leaned in. "That looks like Harold's commission." He turned to his files and returned minutes later with a thick binder. "Yes. Custom piece, oval Colombian emerald, 18-karat yellow gold, internal band engraving, M to H, always." Margaret nodded, emotion tightening her throat. "That ring was supposed to be in my case." He looked up at her with a quiet understanding. "Would you like it officially appraised again? You'll need the serial confirmation for any action." She nodded. "Please do." Back at home, she rewatched Vanessa's party footage. This time, she didn't see glamour. She saw theft disguised as sparkle. She saw hands dipped in entitlement, gestures heavy with greed. When Daniel came by that evening, oblivious, smiling with a plastic bouquet from the grocery store, she said nothing. Just poured him a cup of tea and asked him how work was going. He didn't notice that her ring finger was bare. She did. Later that night, Margaret's phone buzzed. A message from Renaud. Subject, ring confirmation complete. Body, Mrs. Ashton, there's no doubt. That piece belongs to you. Engraving matches. It's one of a kind. Margaret stared at the message, then at the tablet beside her bed. Camera feed glowing quietly in the dark. She tapped to zoom. The vanity was still. But for how long? She thought pawn shops were untraceable. She forgot who bought the jewelry. The receipt was wrinkled, yellowed at the edges, and folded neatly between the pages of a cookbook Margaret hadn't touched in years. It slipped out as she reached for the sugar jar, fluttering onto the kitchen floor like a forgotten secret. She bent down slowly, the ache in her knees a familiar companion, and turned it over. Her eyes narrowed. Emerald-cut diamond earrings. Appraisal value, $7,800. Seller name, Vanessa K. Ashton. The date was from 6 weeks ago. Margaret stared at it, heart thrumming in slow, deliberate beats. She shuffled to her study and opened the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, where she kept old insurance records. The photograph was still there, her wearing those same earrings at her 40th wedding anniversary. Back then, her husband had said they sparkled like something meant to outlast envy, and they were gone. With a shaky breath, she dialed a number she hadn't called in over a decade. "Millie?" Her voice was calm, steady. "You still know people in resale?" Millie laughed softly. "More than I care to admit. Why?" "I need you to help me buy something back." Quietly. The pawn shop on Franklin Street hadn't changed much since the 90s, still cluttered, still reeking faintly of metal and lemon-scented cleaner. Millie walked in alone, wearing her red scarf like a distraction and carrying cash in her handbag. She handed over the pawn receipt with the same offhanded charm she used at auction houses. "Gift for my niece," she said. "I'll take them today if that's all right." The earrings were still there, tucked behind a smudged glass shelf labeled Estate Finds. When Margaret saw them again, cradled in soft velvet, she didn't cry. She simply reached for the appraisal envelope she'd had ready since that morning and tucked the earrings inside. The earrings were home. And now, so was the truth. Margaret began her quiet collection. Photographs, video clips, screenshots of Vanessa's public social media posts, bracelets too familiar, rings worn sideways, a necklace that had once sat against Margaret's own collarbone. She kept her expression airy and scattered when Vanessa was near, missed a few names here, forgot a date there, played the sweet aging matriarch everyone underestimated. Meanwhile, she labeled a red folder in her desk, "If anything happens to me." Inside, she began placing copies, jewelry insurance, appraisals, pawn receipts, time-stamped security footage, a USB drive of phone backups, even a copy of her will with highlighted clauses. She knew how the world viewed older women, harmless, easily dismissed. She used that blindness as armor, but the illusion cracked one night. It was nearly 2 a.m. when the camera in her bedroom sent a motion alert to her tablet. Half asleep, Margaret reached for it, blinking into the screen. There, in grayscale night vision, stood Vanessa, hair tied back, no makeup. Her eyes scanned the room like a fox in a henhouse. She went straight to the vanity, opened the top drawer, rummaged for a full minute. Margaret gripped the blanket tighter, breath shallow. Vanessa paused, looked around, then moved to the closet. Camera number 2 caught her hesitating in front of the jewelry case, her hands resting on the lid but never lifting it. Then she backed away. Quiet. Careful. Gone. The house was silent again, but something louder had just been confirmed. Margaret replayed the footage twice, then downloaded it to the USB. She placed it into the red folder, now nearly full, and clicked it shut. She whispered to the empty room, "So it wasn't just the earrings." And somewhere, deep beneath her calm exterior, a switch had flipped. She called them fake, but they'd been appraised, twice. The sun filtered through the tall windows of Bellamy and Ashcroft Law, where Margaret sat in her usual tailored navy blazer, her silver hair pinned into a dignified twist. A quiet morning in a polished office, yet every breath she took was laced with calculation. Across from her, Emma, her estate attorney, tapped her pen against a legal pad. "Are you sure you want to proceed with this clause?" Emma asked gently. "It's airtight. Vanessa will get nothing without written consent from you. No probate wiggle room." Margaret didn't blink. "Make it ironclad. I want it to require my signature and a witness. Nothing automated, nothing verbal. She gets nothing unless I hand it to her." Emma nodded. "And Daniel?" Margaret folded her hands. "Include him, but not as a beneficiary, as a caution." Later that afternoon, back at home, Margaret pulled out a decoy folder. She filled it with expired wills, outdated insurance forms, and her husband's old hospital receipts, carefully chosen to look just authentic enough. She took the folder to the kitchen and accidentally dropped it while reaching for the kettle. Pages spilled near the trash can. She let them sit. By dusk, Vanessa breezed through the back door, her heels tapping on the hardwood floor like punctuation marks. "Hey, Margaret," she sang out, overly sweet. "Just grabbing that tote I left upstairs." Margaret didn't even turn. "It's right by the hall table. Help yourself." 10 minutes later, when she checked the trash, the folder was gone. Perfect. 2 days later, Margaret made her way to the post office. She mailed a certified letter addressed to Daniel's office downtown. Inside was a copy of the revised will, The security footage stills of Vanessa in her bedroom and a notarized statement at the bottom. "This is not vengeance. It is preparation. Your wife has stolen from me." Brunch came on Sunday. Vanessa and her mother, Doreen, met at a cafe on Magnolia Street, the one with mismatched plates and bottomless mimosas. Margaret wasn't there, but she didn't need to be. She already knew what would unfold. Vanessa flipped through the contents of the folder she'd rescued from the trash. "All this paperwork," she laughed, holding up one of the older wills, "is so outdated. She still has me listed under Margaret's companion, whatever that even means." Doreen sipped her peach Bellini. "She's harmless. Honestly, sweet girl, she's losing it." Vanessa leaned closer. "I'm telling you, she's ripe for a nudge. Daniel and I just need to wait it out. She won't remember where she keeps half this stuff by next month." They both laughed, the kind of brittle laughter that didn't echo beyond their table. What Vanessa didn't know, the brunch waitress was Millie's daughter. She recorded the entire conversation on her phone, with the recorder app open in her apron pocket. Margaret's house was quiet that night. She sat in her study, feet tucked beneath her, sipping from a cup of Darjeeling tea. She looked over the final draft of the will once more. Her handwriting signed the margins in the same ink her husband once favored. Dark green, bold. It felt ceremonial, protective. She reached for the small drawer in her desk and pulled out a yellowed receipt, folded thrice, faded but legible. The emerald necklace had been appraised at $32,000 nearly 15 years ago. It had been reappraised 2 years ago at nearly double that. The appraisal company had notarized both. She smiled faintly. Fake, was it? The receipt went into a new envelope marked to be opened at probate. In a sleek office tower downtown, Daniel opened the certified envelope. He sat frozen, eyes scanning the letter, the photographs. Swing, the clause that spelled it out in plain legal English. If Margaret dies without written approval submitted to this office, Vanessa Ashton inherits nothing. Not jewelry, not property, not a penny. He turned to the final line, written in his mother's hand. "Your wife has stolen from me. Now I'm simply taking back what was mine." The envelope slid from his lap to the floor, landing with a dull thud that felt louder than any scream. The more she gained, the more she revealed. The camera flash was relentless, casting soft bursts of light across white linens and champagne flutes. Vanessa stood at the podium in a crimson sheath dress, her smile just wide enough to land in society columns, but not too genuine to look earnest. Behind her, a sleek banner read, "The Ashton Initiative for Women in Finance, in honor of Margaret Harrow." Margaret, sitting in her sunlit reading nook at home, blinked at the television screen in stunned silence. "In honor of me?" she whispered. Her tea had gone cold. On the screen, Vanessa placed a manicured hand over her chest and said sweetly, "My mother-in-law always taught me that women should be financially independent. This event? It's just a reflection of her influence." There it was, the glint of credit that wasn't earned, just stolen, like a brooch slipped into a purse. Margaret didn't rage. She reached for the remote, muted the audio, and just stared. Her name used like a glossy monogram on a handbag, something fashionable and disposable. The next morning, she waited until Vanessa came into the kitchen, eyes bright from her media buzz. Margaret looked up from peeling an orange. "I saw the news." Vanessa didn't miss a beat. "Wasn't it lovely? You really inspired me." Margaret placed a peel gently onto the plate. "You could have asked." "I figured you'd be flattered," Vanessa said with a shrug, voice feathered with innocence. "You're always saying you want to be remembered." Margaret's expression didn't change, but her fingers paused on the fruit, pressing just a bit harder than before. "Of course," she replied softly. "You're so thoughtful." That night, Margaret opened her laptop and found a journalist she'd quietly followed for years, Elise da Silva, known for covering inheritance scandals and elder exploitation. She wrote one line. "Would you be interested in a story involving stolen identity, hidden accounts, and designer lies?" She clicked send. The cursor blinked, steady and patient. Just like her. Days passed, but Elise responded. They met at a modest cafe off Riverbend Avenue. Margaret arrived alone, her coat folded neatly over one arm, wearing a quiet strand of pearls. Not her heirlooms, just a small nod to Grace. "I won't slander her," Margaret said firmly. "I just want to be understood." Elise had nodded, eyes sharp but kind. "Then let's start with what she's taken." Margaret slid a slim folder across the table, a list of gifts Vanessa had requested, jewelry, wire transfers, even the charity event's seed money. "I never authorized that event," Margaret said, "but I paid for it." One afternoon, Daniel found Margaret sorting more papers. The air was thick with the scent of lemon polish and old ink. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Just organizing what I have left." He stepped forward, tension in his shoulders. "Vanessa said you've been digging into things. It's upsetting the balance." "The balance?" Margaret echoed, folding a bank statement. "Interesting word." Balance, Daniel softened. "I'm just asking you not to sabotage the peace. Things are delicate right now." She finally looked up, calm and razor-sharp. "Daniel, peace is what people ask for when they're afraid of truth." He said nothing, then turned and left. That evening, Elise called. Her voice was low, measured. "I ran the names through our database," she said. "We found an LLC registered in your name. You're listed as the angel donor, except, of course, you never signed any documents." Margaret's breath caught. "What?" "It's been funding Vanessa's charity. She filed it using your details, your previous donations, your address, everything." Margaret gripped the edge of the table, the wood grain biting into her palm. "She used my money to build herself a stage," she murmured. "And painted your name on the curtain," Elise added. Margaret opened a locked drawer in her bedroom and pulled out a small notebook. Names, dates, transactions, every indignity inked with elegance. She flipped to the next blank page. At the top, in perfect cursive, she wrote, LLC, Vanessa Ashton, fraud suspected, proof pending. And then beneath it, "I won't just haunt her memory, I'll inherit her silence." Inside that box wasn't just jewelry, it was a map of betrayal. The velvet gloves didn't help much. The metal was cold, stubborn. Margaret's fingers trembled slightly as she turned the key in the safe deposit box, the heavy steel drawer gliding out with a mechanical groan that seemed too loud for the quiet, temperature-controlled room. She hadn't opened this box in years. The last time, it had been with Harold, her husband of nearly 4 decades. They'd laughed then, bickering about how many times he'd double-wrapped the receipts just in case. Back when nothing felt fragile except the rice paper lining their anniversary letters. Now, the room smelled of stale paper and old metal, sterile, like truth itself. Margaret gently unwrapped a stack of envelopes bound in an emerald green ribbon, the exact shade of the necklace Vanessa had mocked. Beneath them was a smaller cloth pouch, not the jewelry box that Vanessa had rifled through, but something older, quieter. She opened it. Inside, a folded note card. "Only for the one who still remembers why I chose emeralds." Below it were appraisals, dated, signed, verified by 2 separate jewelers. There were voice memos on a mini recorder, Harold's unmistakable voice speaking with warmth, clarity, and foresight. "If you're hearing this," he said in one recording, "then I'm gone, and I hope whoever has their hands on this isn't just looking at sparkle but at what it meant. The necklace, the ring, the earrings, they're more than carats. They're promises. For Margaret, not for fashion, not for status, for love." Her throat tightened. She hit pause and set it aside like a relic too sacred to finish. Beneath the velvet lining lay a sealed letter. She opened it with delicate fingers. His handwriting was firm. "In the event of my death, I instruct that the jewelry set be passed down only to an individual who values its sentimental worth over its monetary value. If no such individual exists, the set shall remain in trust." There was no name, only intention. But Margaret knew exactly what he meant. Harold had written this before Vanessa ever walked into their lives, and somehow he'd already anticipated the storm. Back home, Margaret set the documents in a manila envelope and pressed it flat beneath a heavy leather journal. She called her lawyer. "Is this clause enforceable?" she asked. His voice came through steady on speakerphone. It is, especially now that we can confirm the item's original value and intent. This protects both the assets and your wishes. I'll begin reappraisal immediately. Good, she said quietly, eyes on the window. It's time we valued what matters. That evening, Margaret sat at her bedroom vanity, the envelope resting like a crown beside her jewelry box. She opened the top drawer slowly. She had never needed to count the pieces before, but now she did. 5 rings, 2 brooches, the gold watch from Harold's retirement. Everything that should have been there wasn't. 2 of the more modest pieces were missing. Again. Before she could decide whether to call the lawyer back, a door slammed downstairs. Heavy, fast footsteps thundered up the staircase. Her bedroom door burst open without warning. Vanessa, hair pulled back, face red, fury glowing in her eyes like polished onyx. "You're having my things appraised?" Vanessa snapped, storming into the room. Margaret didn't rise from her seat. "Your things?" she asked, the edge in her voice as sharp as glass under velvet. "You know what I mean?" Vanessa hissed, gesturing toward the jewelry box. "If you're suddenly deciding to revisit everything, I have a right to know. Those are my future heirlooms. Daniel said—" Margaret cut in softly. "Daniel doesn't have my signature." Vanessa stopped short. "I've been kind, quiet, tolerant." Margaret continued, rising now with deliberate slowness, the envelope still untouched on the vanity. "But don't mistake history for permission. You think you can just take it all back?" "No," Margaret replied, eyes unwavering. "I already have." Vanessa's gaze darted to the jewelry box. She lunged toward it, only to find it empty. Margaret turned her back, walked calmly to the door, and called down the hall, "Daniel, your wife is trespassing." From the hallway, silence, and then footsteps approaching. Vanessa spun to Margaret, voice cracking. "What exactly are you planning?" Margaret opened a drawer and pulled out the voice recorder. She didn't press play, just held it up. "Something Harold started," she said, "and I intend to finish." She cried on cue, but I had the footage queued up. Margaret sat calmly at the kitchen table, her tea cooling between her palms. Outside, the wind pushed soft shadows across the porch, but inside the house, the tension was a cold front no furnace could fix. Vanessa's heels clicked through the hallway like a metronome ticking toward confrontation. "You've crossed a line," Vanessa snapped, stepping into the room with her phone in hand and a twisted smile that didn't reach her eyes. Margaret blinked slowly, keeping her tone warm. "Good morning, dear. Tea?" "Don't play cute. You've been snooping, having things appraised behind my back. Recording conversations?" She raised the phone like a badge of accusation. "You're clearly confused. This is getting unhealthy." There it was. The subtle shift, mocking concern layered over accusation. Vanessa's brand of gaslight always came dressed in pearls and polite grammar. "I see," Margaret said, rising. "Well, if we're being honest, I have something too." She walked to the corner armoire and opened a small drawer. Inside, a sleek black remote. She pressed play on the TV mounted discreetly in the corner. The screen flickered to life. The footage was clean. Crisp. Vanessa. Standing in Margaret's room 3 nights ago, her hair pulled into a bun, her voice hushed but sharp. "I swear, Daniel, she won't even notice. She's slipping, and if she doesn't remember, then it's not stealing, it's securing our future." The clip paused. Margaret turned slowly. Vanessa's face drained of color. "I've been called a lot of things in my life," Margaret said. "Forgetful, fragile, outdated. But not once, not even in the worst of grief, was I ever careless." Vanessa stepped forward, voice shaking. "This is illegal surveillance. You can't just record me without what? You entering a room that isn't yours? Without handling property that isn't yours? Without planning to take more?" Margaret lifted the remote and clicked again. The next clip showed Vanessa opening the jewelry box, lifting one of the rings and muttering under her breath, "No one will miss this old crap." Vanessa staggered back a step. "I didn't mean that," she whispered. "You're twisting." "I'm preserving," Margaret said firmly, "and so is my lawyer." Hours later, Margaret sat across from her attorney, the footage now copied onto a flash drive resting on the polished oak desk. "She's smart," the lawyer said. "Smarter than she lets on. But this shows intention, not carelessness. You were right to document." "I'm not trying to ruin her," Margaret said, hands folded in her lap. "But I won't let her rewrite my story while I'm still alive to hold the pen." "We'll amend the estate," he said, pulling up a document. "Add a clause specific to psychological manipulation. You'll maintain full discretion over all distributions. And I want that language ironclad, no appeal, no interpretation." He nodded. "Done." That evening, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Margaret had taken to locking her bedroom door now, not because she feared Vanessa, but because the line had been crossed. She stepped into her room, the soft creak of floorboards a reminder that the house still listened. Across the hallway, a door slammed, then came the footsteps. Vanessa entered without knocking. "You're framing me," she said flatly. "I know you've been playing games, twisting things." Margaret didn't respond. She just sipped her tea, the calm before the storm. "You think you're clever? You're old and bored and petty, and you'll die alone, clutching dusty rocks no one wants." There was venom now. The mask had cracked. Margaret tilted her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then why are you still here, Vanessa?" Vanessa turned, rage crackling around her. She yanked open the jewelry box drawer and gasped. It was empty. Every slot that once held heirlooms now held air. She spun around, eyes wild. "Where is it?" Margaret stood slowly, her face unreadable. "Some things," she said, "don't live where thieves look." Vanessa opened another drawer, and inside found only a folded note. Its words in Margaret's clean, cursive hand. "Try again. You're not done teaching me how low you'll go." They expected candles and cake. I brought an appraiser. The afternoon sun spilled golden light across the polished floors of Margaret's home, where pale roses filled crystal vases and delicate linen napkins had been folded into swans. The air smelled of vanilla cake, citrus cocktails, and something sharper, unspoken tension. Margaret stood in the center of the room, dressed in a tailored dove-gray blouse and a strand of emeralds that shimmered like ocean secrets around her neck. A slight smirk played on her lips, but her spine was straight, proud. Today wasn't just a birthday, it was an exhibit. Guests trickled in, smiling and handing her polite hugs and gift bags. The dining table gleamed with charcuterie boards, but no one missed the velvet-lined table near the fireplace, displayed neatly, rings, brooches, bracelets, and the crown jewel, the emerald set Vanessa had once called fake costume junk. "Happy birthday, Margaret," someone called. A cheer went up, but it wavered as a man in a navy suit rolled in a silver case beside him. Is that an appraiser?" one guest whispered to another. Margaret's voice rang clear. "Oh yes, I thought it would be fun, a little real-world value check. Let's find out what's treasure and what's just shiny." The appraiser, a sharp-eyed man named Roland, opened his kit with the reverence of a surgeon. He gestured for silence. "We'll begin with the emerald set," he said, lifting it with gloved hands. "Colombian origin, late 1930s, near perfect clarity. Initial. Appraisal suggests well into 6 figures." Murmurs, a few gasps. Vanessa, standing in the corner with a stiff drink and forced smile, visibly stiffened. Her grip on the glass tightened. "Oh, would you look at that?" Margaret said lightly, her gaze drifting over the crowd to land on Vanessa. "Not costume, after all." Roland moved to the next tray. A sapphire ring, a gold locket. Then a pair of vintage diamond studs, displayed on the table but not from Margaret's collection. "These don't have a certificate," Roland said. "Do they belong to you, Mrs. Blake?" He turned to Margaret. Margaret raised an eyebrow. They were recently reacquired." Roland nodded and continued. "Still technically registered under your estate." The room tensed. A few guests exchanged looks. Vanessa laughed suddenly, brittle as glass. "This is ridiculous. You're turning your birthday into an interrogation." "No, darling," Margaret replied, stepping toward her. I'm turning it into a revelation." Then Vanessa made the mistake Margaret had expected. She turned too fast. Her wine glass slipped, red liquid arcing like blood across the cream tablecloth, splashing the corner of Roland's kit. Gasps echoed. The velvet trays were spared, but only just. Roland frowned, stepping back. Vanessa turned scarlet. "I think it's time I go," she muttered, brushing past Daniel. "You should sit," Margaret said, louder now. "There's one more item." She reached beneath the table and pulled out a small, zippered pouch. Inside, a notarized document and a receipt, dated, photographed, sealed in a protective sleeve. Roland read aloud, "Proof of ownership. Documented transfer to Margaret Clark by Jonathan Clark, dated December 2007. Vanessa stared, silent. Margaret smiled at the crowd. "I suppose what we wear says less about us than what we try to hide." The room was quiet now, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full. Of recalculations, of realignments. Guests looked between the two women, unsure of what had just unfolded, but knowing it meant something permanent had shifted. Daniel cleared his throat, face red. "Mom, was this really necessary?" Margaret didn't flinch. "No, Daniel, but it was overdue." As the crowd began thinning out, some guests excusing themselves awkwardly, others lingering to offer quiet congratulations, Margaret turned back to Roland. "Thank you," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "You've done more than appraise jewelry today." Roland tipped his head. "Happy to help." Later that night, when the lights had dimmed and even the spilled wine had been mopped away, Margaret sat at her desk under a reading lamp. She pulled a manila envelope from her drawer and slid the final form inside. An official report for elder financial exploitation. Her pen glided across the line. To District Attorney's Office. Subject: theft under durable power of attorney. Involved: party, Vanessa Blake. Margaret sealed the envelope and whispered to the empty room, "You said I was confused. Let's see how clear the law is." She went viral, but not for what she wanted. Vanessa stared at her phone, her manicured nails frozen mid-scroll. The glowing screen, once a source of curated adoration, now pulsed with chaos. Her name, number Vanessa the Vulture, was trending, but not for a brand launch or a brunch outfit. The screenshots had surfaced overnight. Text messages mocking Margaret's costume jewelry, a voice note laughing about how the old bat wouldn't know a sapphire from a spoon, and worst of all, a photo of Vanessa at a charity gala, wearing the emerald necklace. The comments came in fast, brutal, and unapologetic. "You stole from your MIL and bragged about it? Disgusting. She built her legacy and you tried to pawn it for clout. Hope the wine was worth it, Vanessa." Vanessa tried to post a statement, something vague and tearful, but the moment she uploaded it, the comments turned savage. The post was deleted within 15 minutes, but screenshots ensured it lived forever. In her luxury condo, the silence was deafening. Even Daniel had stopped pacing. He stood at the window, phone limp in his hand, face pale. "She's not just telling stories now," he muttered. "She's on a podcast." Vanessa looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Daniel turned his screen to her. A podcast called The Last Will had just uploaded an episode titled Gilded Lies, A Grandmother's Fight for Truth. The episode art was simple, an old woman's wrinkled hand placing a jeweled necklace into a velvet box. Vanessa lunged for the phone. She can't even use Spotify." Daniel didn't respond. His jaw flexed. The doorbell rang. Vanessa froze. "Don't answer that." But it was too late. Daniel opened the door. A woman stood there, crisp suit, clipboard in hand. "Vanessa Blake?" Vanessa appeared behind him, voice tight. "Yes?" The woman handed over a sealed envelope. "You've been served. Restraining order. Filed by Margaret Clark under elder abuse protection statutes. Effective immediately." Daniel grabbed the document, flipping through it. This is insane. She can't." Vanessa started. "She did," the woman said flatly. "And it's already processed." The door closed behind her like a verdict. Daniel tossed the document onto the coffee table. "Do you realize what you've done?" Vanessa's voice cracked. "You were part of this. You didn't stop me. You said she'd forget. I didn't think she'd record everything. Or get a lawyer who works faster than Twitter. They stood in silence, the weight of consequence sinking into the designer rug under their feet. Later that evening, Daniel made a quiet visit to Margaret's home. She was in the sitting room, folding letters into crisp envelopes. A small radio played classical music in the background. She didn't look up. He cleared his throat. Mom. Margaret folded another letter. Daniel. He looked older in that moment, hunched not from age, but burden. She's being dragged everywhere, publicly. People are saying awful things. Margaret finally looked up. Her eyes were tired, but resolute. Did I say anything untrue? He flinched. No. Did she? He hesitated. Maybe. Margaret let the silence hang before breaking it with a single, clean sentence. You knew. Daniel sat down heavily. I didn't want to believe it. You did. You just didn't want to lose the lifestyle she gave you. That's not fair. She raised her voice for the first time in weeks. Fair? Is it fair to take what isn't yours? To let someone lie and cheat and humiliate someone who raised you? I gave you everything. I let you grow in a world I had to build brick by brick while people like her called it quaint. Daniel looked down. Margaret returned to her envelopes. You can go now. When Daniel stepped out, the evening wind met him with a kind of judgment he couldn't shake. Back at his condo, he unlocked his banking app to transfer funds for Vanessa's legal defense. Error. Access denied. Account restricted. Confused, he tried again. Same result. A ping from his email landed like a final blow. Subject: Co-signer authority removal. Margaret Clark. Your access to joint accounts has been revoked per Clause 7B. Daniel reread the email 3 times before whispering, She didn't just cut Vanessa off. She cut me off too. Her silence said everything, but her voicemail confessed more. The living room was quiet, sunlight dripping through the sheer curtains like slow honey. Margaret sat at her desk, sorting through old papers and notes, filing, discarding, shredding. Her fingers trembled over an unlabeled flash drive tucked inside an envelope addressed in her husband's handwriting. Curious, she plugged it into her laptop. A single file blinked on screen, a voicemail. She clicked play. Vanessa's voice poured through the speakers, sugary and sharp. Honestly, the old woman has no taste. I mean, who still decorates with floral curtains? It's like a thrift store mated with a teapot. I'm telling you, when she finally forgets her own name, I'll just take whatever's left. Sell the jewelry on Etsy, maybe. None of it's real anyway. Margaret's spine stiffened. The edges of her lips curled into something between sorrow and resolve. She didn't cry. She copied the file, labeled it clearly, and forwarded it to Camille, the journalist who had been quietly building a case around elder financial abuse. Less than 48 hours later, Margaret's name appeared again, this time on the homepage of Legacy Matters, a respected publication on estate planning, featuring a scathing article titled Heirlooms and Hijackers, A Modern Cautionary Tale. Alongside excerpts from the voicemail was a photograph, Margaret holding up a small velvet box, the glint of emeralds inside catching the light. But it wasn't the jewelry that stole attention, it was the caption beneath it. They mocked her taste. She redefined the value. That same week, Margaret took her plan further. She called a reputable auction house and scheduled a private estate sale, not because she needed the money, but because she wanted to choose where it would go. The proceeds were directed toward founding a startup incubator for senior women entrepreneurs, something she'd dreamed about since her early bakery days but never had time for. Most people don't think of women over 60 as innovators, she told the interviewer with a wink. We're the ones who taught everyone else how to stir the pot. Vanessa, upon hearing about the auction, filed a last-ditch legal petition, claiming emotional theft and financial alienation. Her attorney submitted it with confidence, but the judge's response was swift. Vanessa's claims were unfounded and unsupported, especially given the ongoing fraud investigation surrounding her misappropriated LLC and pawnshop transactions. She didn't just lose, she was reprimanded. The humiliation silenced her, temporarily. Back at home, Margaret sat across from her lawyer, pen in hand, as they reviewed her estate's final revision. You're absolutely certain? the lawyer asked. Margaret nodded once. Remove them both. And the contingency clause? Leave it, she said. If they ever find their conscience, they'll know where to start. He handed her a fresh page. She signed without hesitation. As the lawyer packed up his briefcase, he paused, reaching into another folder. We uncovered something else, he said, at the safety deposit box, tucked behind the appraisal records. He slid a crisp envelope across the table. The paper was yellowed slightly at the corners, but the handwriting was unmistakable, her husband's. Margaret opened it carefully. Inside was an unsigned draft of a will. Her husband had written it just a few months before his heart attack. It named Margaret as the sole beneficiary not only of their assets, but of his shares in the family business, which had been passed down through generations. I didn't know he had this, she whispered. The lawyer smiled gently. It's not legally binding, but it does support everything you've done, and it confirms what you already knew. He trusted you, completely. Margaret folded the paper slowly, reverently. He knew the storm was coming, he just didn't know who would bring the rain. She slipped the unsigned will back into the envelope as the lawyer said softly, With this, you can challenge Daniel's business access too, if you choose to. They thought I wore fake jewels. I was building a real empire. The envelope felt heavier than paper had any right to. Margaret sat in her study, the morning light catching the edge of her reading glasses, hands steady as she unfolded the letter that had waited over a decade to be seen. Inside, the validation. Her husband's unsigned will had, by some miracle, been confirmed by two witnesses, his former business partner and their longtime accountant. A notary seal had been affixed to an early draft before his sudden passing, and with the supporting testimony, her attorney confirmed the document had legal standing under legacy confirmation statutes. Margaret, her lawyer said over the phone, voice barely hiding his awe, you are now the sole majority shareholder of the Remington Family Corporation. She didn't speak at first. She simply looked across the room at the old photograph on her mantel. Her husband, young and smiling in his suit, his arm around her waist like she was the foundation of everything he built. Because she was. The next morning, Margaret walked into the corporate building for the first time in years. No fanfare, no announcement, just the soft click of her low-heeled shoes echoing across the marble floors as she entered with a calm that silenced every receptionist and junior exec in her path. She paused at the security desk, where the guard, a man no older than her grandson, looked up and blinked. I'm here to update the access registry, she said, producing a new set of authorization documents. The guard scanned the papers, eyes widening. Ma'am, you now have executive override clearance. I'm aware, she said with a slight smile. Please remove Daniel Remington's credentials, effective immediately. At precisely 10:42 a.m., Daniel Remington stormed toward the building, briefcase in hand, suit pressed, face flushed. He swiped his keycard. Access denied. He tried again. Again. The turnstile locked in place. What the hell is going on? He snapped. The guard, nervous, held up a hand. Sir, I can't let you through. There's been a change in ownership. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Who? The elevator behind them dinged open. Margaret stepped out, flanked by two board members and a woman holding a stack of legal folders. Daniel's jaw went slack. You? He choked. Margaret met his stare with a calmness that froze the room. You knew, she said simply, and walked past him without waiting for an answer. Later that afternoon, Vanessa checked her inbox and found a new message from an unfamiliar legal firm. Subject: Redirection of Remington business proceeds. She clicked it open. Dear Ms. Vanessa Remington, please be advised that due to recent legal restructuring and inheritance validation, you are no longer entitled to any current or future proceeds derived from Remington business operations. Any prior assumption of interest or affiliation has been lawfully terminated. Monsieur Owens, legal counsel to Margaret Remington. Vanessa's hand trembled as she scrolled down. At the bottom of the email was an attachment, a spreadsheet. Financials she recognized, except now every line under her name was labeled revoked. Unbelievable, she hissed. But the blow hadn't finished landing. That evening, Margaret's attorney called with yet another update. A third party, an international charity coalition, had opened a civil suit against Vanessa for embezzlement. They claimed that funds donated in Margaret's name to a vanity foundation Vanessa had created were misused and unaccounted for. Bank statements, travel expenses, designer invoices, all tied to a fraudulent event plan. Ning budget. She used your name, the lawyer said gravely, to steal from charities. Margaret didn't flinch. She already knew. She thought pearls and press would crown her, she murmured, but it takes more than a handbag and an Instagram post to build a legacy. That night, in her private study, she opened her husband's old journal. Between the pages, he'd scribbled a quote from their early years: "Power, when quiet, is the loudest sound in the room." She smiled, traced the ink with her fingers, and closed the book. As she turned off the lamp, her phone buzzed. A news alert. Vanessa Remington named in federal fraud probe. Charity watchdog calls it theft wrapped in designer ribbon. They laughed at what I wore. Now they can't afford what I gave away. The air in the estate conference room was crisp with tension and perfume, polished wood tables gleaming under chandeliers, every chair filled except the two intentionally left empty near the front. A silver tea tray rested at Margaret's elbow, untouched. She sat in her usual graceful silence, her hands folded, her back straight, wearing the same emerald necklace Vanessa once ridiculed. Only now, the gems didn't just sparkle, they glared. Outside the venue, members of the local press milled behind velvet ropes. Inside, lawyers shuffled legal binders, and the head notary cleared his throat. A camera crew from a women's business network adjusted their mics, ready to broadcast the story Margaret had kept private. Until now. At the back of the room, Daniel stood stiff in a gray suit that didn't fit him like it used to. He hadn't been given a seat at the table. That was intentional. He had already surrendered too many opportunities to defend his mother. This was her turn. The attorney spoke first. Today, we formally execute the final distribution of the Remington estate under the revised will of Margaret J. Remington, in accordance with statutes of philanthropic endowment and contested heir rights. Margaret raised a hand gently. "Before the numbers begin," she said, her voice soft but cutting through the room like a scalpel, "I'd like to say a few words." The room stilled. "For years," she began, eyes sweeping over the notary, the journalists, and then resting briefly, coldly on Daniel. "I believed inheritance was a gift, something earned through blood, loyalty, compassion. I was wrong. It's not earned, it's often assumed." She let that sit in the silence. "And assumption is the root of all entitlement." A small rustle came from the back, Daniel shifting, lips parting as if to interject, but a look from Margaret stopped him mid-breath. She gestured to the first document, a single-page summary of the new will. The attorney read aloud, "To the Remington Women's Advancement Fund, $2.8 million in seed capital. To the Hearthstone Women's Shelter, full ownership of the East Lake Townhouse, including all furnishings. To the Remington Bakery staff, bonuses totaling $300,000, divided by tenure." The lawyer paused, scanning the room. There are no other beneficiaries named. A stunned, collective hush. Daniel's face turned pale. Margaret leaned forward, folding her hands atop a navy leather folder. "As of this moment," she said, "my son and his wife are no longer heirs, not by legal oversight, by design." A journalist in the corner whispered, "Did she really say that?" She turned toward them. "You can quote me." The doors at the back creaked as someone entered late. Vanessa, overdressed in sharp white, hair pulled too tightly, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the indoor lighting. She moved like a woman used to skipping lines and breaking rules. She reached the front only to be stopped by the notary. "This is a closed execution," Vanessa hissed. "I have a right." "You had a right," Margaret corrected, rising from her chair. "You lost it." Vanessa's eyes darted to the necklace. "That necklace," she started, her voice shrill, "it was always going to be mine." Margaret picked up a small velvet pouch from her folder. The room held its breath. She walked toward Vanessa and extended it, not with anger but with something colder, finality. Vanessa grabbed it greedily and pulled it open. Inside was a receipt, aged but pristine, and a handwritten note. Since you asked. Purchased, appraised, and loved. Never yours. M. Before Vanessa could respond, Margaret had already turned her back and returned to the table. Resume, please, she said to the notary, reclaiming her seat. In the hallway, Vanessa crumpled the note, but the receipt remained in her hand, a piece of truth she couldn't destroy. Daniel approached her slowly, but she stepped away, her pride more bruised than her reputation. At the head of the table, Margaret lifted her teacup at last. It tasted like jasmine and justice. As the cameras flashed and papers were signed, the attorney leaned toward Margaret and whispered, "You may want to see this. Vanessa just filed an appeal, on grounds of emotional duress. Sometimes the most expensive things are the ones they called worthless." The morning sunlight spilled across Margaret's kitchen table like gold, bright, quiet, uncomplicated. A thin stack of handwritten letters sat beside her steaming cup of chamomile tea. Each envelope had different handwriting, different stamps, but the words inside carried the same weight. Thank you for showing me it's not selfish to protect what you built. I never thought I could rewrite my will. You gave me the courage. My son's wife used to laugh at my costume brooches too. I kept them. And now I'm teaching my granddaughter what they really meant. Margaret traced her fingers over the indents of one signature. The letters came from women in their 60s, 70s, even late 80s. Widows, divorcees, daughters who'd become invisible. They saw themselves in her story, not because of the jewelry, but because of the silence they'd swallowed for years. She had broken that silence, and somehow, without knowing it, she'd handed them permission to do the same. Later that day, she set up her camera. Not the kind Vanessa used, all ring lights and contour palettes. This was simpler, no filters, no edits. Just Margaret seated in her reading chair, her emerald necklace catching the soft light from the window, the frame filled with warmth and quiet strength. If you're watching this, she began, you've been told at least once in your life that what you own doesn't matter, that you should be grateful for crumbs, that what you've stitched, baked, built, saved could never compare to what others flaunt. She looked directly into the lens. I'm here to tell you. They lied. Thus began her video series, Claiming Quiet Power, Estate Wisdom for Women. Each week she posted a new lesson, from how to lock a trust, to reading the fine print in caregiving contracts, to what to do if your jewelry vanishes one earring at a time. She told stories, offered checklists, and answered questions with the calm, no-nonsense clarity of someone who'd lived the consequences of waiting too long to fight back. Her subscriber list crossed 5,000 within a month. One of her episodes was shared on a podcast, Women Over 50, Loud and Legal. Margaret never raised her voice in the videos. She didn't need to. A month after the estate signing, she signed one more document, the deed to a small cabin upstate. The air was cooler there, crisp and pine-scented, free from the stale perfume of courtrooms and fake brunches. The cabin had a porch swing, a fireplace, and a lofted room she planned to turn into a writing den. Her first draft was already underway. The jewelry box was never empty, a memoir of boundaries and inheritance. One afternoon, while unpacking ceramic mugs and heirloom quilts, her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Daniel. Hi, Mom. I know I was silent too long. I'm sorry. Vanessa is figuring things out. Hope you're okay. She stared at the message for a long moment before typing her reply. Margaret. Thank you. No need to visit. She hit send and put the phone away, the same way you shelve a book you've already read twice and no longer need to keep. The next day, a delivery truck rumbled up the dirt road. Package for Margaret Remington, the courier called out, holding a box no bigger than a jewelry case. Margaret signed without a word. The packaging was unmarked, the return address non-existent. Inside, nestled in black velvet, were her missing items, the ring, the earrings, a brooch she hadn't realized was gone until this moment. No note, no apology. Just a thin manila envelope tucked beneath the velvet containing photographs of the pawn receipts. Voided. It was the quietest confession Vanessa had ever made. Margaret folded the envelope slowly, almost gently, and walked it to her fireplace. She didn't toss it in out of vengeance, only closure. The fire caught quickly. As the flame flickered behind her, Margaret's phone buzzed again. This time a message from an unknown number. "My mother never taught me value. You did. Can we talk?" She called them fake. Now she has nothing real left. Vanessa pushed open the closet door with the same flair she'd practiced since the day she married into the Remington name, expecting rows of silk, the glint of gems, the comfort of luxury. But what greeted her was silence. Bare rods, empty shelves, a cavernous hush where opulence used to live. Her designer coats? Gone. The curated collection of evening dresses she never wore twice? Missing. Her rows of shoes, bags, boxes, branded satin dust covers, all vanished. Except one thing. Dead center on a lone gold hanger hung an empty velvet jewelry case, open like a mouth left agape mid-sentence. Inside there was no sparkle, no echo of the heirlooms she once mocked, just a folded piece of crisp paper tucked against the velvet like a secret long kept. Vanessa's manicured fingers trembled as she unfolded it. Authenticity certificate, emerald necklace set, date of purchase. September 12, 1989. Client, Robert and Margaret Remington, appraised value, $142,000 USD. Scrawled below the typed lines, in Margaret's handwriting, were 5 simple words. "Since you asked, not costume." Vanessa's throat went dry. The walls of the closet, once her kingdom of curated identity, now felt like they were closing in. She stumbled back, her heel catching on the plush carpet, and landed hard on the floor, staring up at the emptiness she'd built her image around. The silence pressed down. It was heavy. Real. Across town, sunlight spilled into Margaret's sunroom like liquid serenity. The windows were thrown open, letting in the slow rustle of spring wind and the faint scent of lavender from the backyard. Her teacup rested lightly in her hand, fine bone china, patterned with vines and gold. She wore the emerald necklace today. Not for show, not for vengeance, because it belonged to her. Because today was hers. She leaned into the cushion of her armchair, tapping her iPad once to start recording. The soft chime of her podcast intro played through the speaker. Margaret's voice. "Good afternoon, listeners. This will be my final episode in this series, but I want you to remember this." A pause, long and certain. Then, "Never let someone else define your value, not by your clothes, not by your silence, not by what they think you should have been grateful for. Shine anyway, and if they say it's fake, let them look again, once it's too late." Back in the townhouse Vanessa once ruled like a showroom, she lay on the closet floor, surrounded by nothing but echo. Her inbox pinged, another sponsor terminating their contract. Her PR team was silent. Her followers had moved on. Her husband, Daniel, hadn't come home the night before. All that remained was the receipt, and a line she couldn't forget. That night, Margaret stood at her porch with her shawl wrapped loosely over her shoulders. The sky above her was clear, studded with stars that didn't apologize for outshining the rest of the world. A soft breeze whispered through the pines. A black sedan rolled down the gravel road toward her gate. It didn't stop. It slowed. And then a velvet pouch, tied with a black ribbon, was placed carefully in her mailbox by a pale hand through the window. The car disappeared into the night. Margaret walked to the mailbox without urgency. She didn't need to open it right away. She already knew what was inside. She smiled faintly, returning to her chair as her voice echoed one last time through the speakers. Final voiceover from podcast. "They took what sparkled. I kept what was priceless. She took what sparkled. I kept what was priceless."